Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Carmen Brown Marshall, a product specialist with Cytiva. I'm also an author, a patient advocate, and a 17-year breast cancer survivor. Thank you for joining our conversation in support of the Breast Cancer Research Foundation. Recently, I just want to give a few facts before I introduce our panelists. Recently, the World Health Organization announced that breast cancer is now the most commonly diagnosed cancer worldwide. Now, this is surpassing lung cancer for the first time. And 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime. And 25 to 30% of those women will experience metastases, which means it will spread to other parts of the body. This can be overwhelming to take in, but thankfully, we now have hope because we have an organization like the Breast Cancer Research Foundation, which is able to bring new discoveries to light. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Dorraya El-Ashry and Dr. Lisa A. Carey. Welcome, Dorraya and Lisa.
Thank you, Carmen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Carmen.
All right. So I'd like to kind of level set the conversation by going right to Dr. Dorraya. I'd like for you to just introduce yourself to the audience and tell us your title, what you do, and a little bit about your research.
Well, thank you, Carmen, and I'm thrilled to be here with you all today. So I am the Chief Scientific Officer at BCRF, and I joined in 2019 with over 30 years of experience as a researcher myself, as well as experience with BCRF funding. And so I knew all about BCRF as the largest nonprofit funder of breast cancer research globally. And so as the Chief Scientific Officer, I lead our research program and identify how the foundation's role in scientific discoveries translates into real-world impact for patients.
That's fantastic. I, being a patient, really appreciate that. My journey began with breast cancer, and to be included on a platform with you and Lisa, who is also a BCRF researcher and medical oncologist, I would love for Lisa to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about what she does and introduce herself.
Sure, I'm happy to. So I'm Lisa Carey. As Carmen mentioned, I'm a breast cancer medical oncologist here at the University of North Carolina. I am both a clinician and a researcher. My particular area of expertise is in clinical trials and what's called translational research, which is looking at the tumor and how it explains how cancers behave in response to therapy. I'm also the Deputy Director of Clinical Science here at Lineberger, and in the National Breast Cancer Universe, I co-chair a cooperative group committee called for the Alliance, and also co-chair the executive committee for the Translational Breast Cancer Research Consortium.
We are thrilled to have you both, Dorraya and Lisa. Let me talk just a bit about BCRF, which was founded in 1993. You've already shared how it is one of the largest. But what I appreciate as a breast cancer survivor is how you convene the scientists with the brightest minds for an opportunity to pursue the most innovative ideas to help us as breast cancer survivors and thrivers. And for you out there watching, please use the chat function to submit your questions throughout the broadcast. As you settle in, take a moment to say hello and let us know where you're coming from. What continent are you on, or what state are you in? Just type it in the chat so we can see. Now, if you have questions, I want you to know that your name will appear when you submit your question. You can also be anonymous if you don't want your name to appear. And we kindly ask that you refrain from asking personal medical questions, as our panelists are not able to comment on those issues. So Dorraya, if I could start with you, what led you to join BCRF as the Chief Scientific Officer?
Well, as I mentioned, I've had an over 30-year career as a breast cancer researcher in the area of metastatic breast cancer research. And I knew all about BCRF because I was involved in BCRF-funded research. And so when this opportunity to join BCRF as the Chief Scientific Officer came, I jumped at it because while I had my career as a scientific researcher and led my lab, now I could really come and have an impact globally on breast cancer research by, as I said before, stewarding the research portfolio of the Breast Cancer Research Foundation.
That's great. And why research? I think I just want to just put it out there and ask you.
Well, we've had tremendous gains in breast cancer research over the last 30 years, including a decrease in mortality by 40%, as well as the advent of many new molecular targeted therapies and just better outcomes and earlier detection. And the reason for that is research. Research is the reason.
That's great. Now, given the climate over the last 18 months, what's been your greatest challenge leading the BCRF? What have you faced? And what can you tell us?
Well, so over the last 18 months, our challenge has been this pandemic. As a funding foundation that funds research, that has been our challenge, is that funding is down. And as we've talked about, research is the reason we've made all these tremendous gains, and research will be the reason that we will tackle this disease and continue to make gains. And so we have worked to get our message out, get the impact of research out, and really work in this downturn of funding.
Yeah.
And all of this at a time when one of our greatest challenges is metastatic breast cancer, which you'll hear more about later. And with the pandemic, with later stage diagnoses predicted to come from delays in screening and diagnosis, combined then with the downturn in funding, these have been our greatest challenges.
Thank you. So, Lisa, as a medical oncologist and a clinical researcher, what led you to become a breast cancer researcher? And what can you tell us about your current BCRF supported research?
Oh, sure. I was always a researcher. I did research in non-cancer things before I even became a physician. But I became a breast cancer researcher specifically because, in cancer, and particularly breast cancer, there was so much going on that was clearly going to go from the laboratory into the clinic, incipiently, quickly. And I wanted to be part of that. Combining that with the fact that, to be honest, I really, really like breast cancer patients. I love my patients. So I was helping to improve, the care we give to them, and also having a wonderful clinical experience with people who are really amazing and inspirational, is why I became a breast cancer doctor and researcher.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, my BCRF funded research actually, I think, Dorraya expressed it just beautifully as she always does. My research is about comparing, looking at the original breast cancer in the breast and also the metastasis in other parts of the body. And the reason that's important and crucial and really hard to do is because traditionally our examinations of the biology of breast cancer have been studies done on the tumor that came out of the breast, but that's not actually what people die from. They die from disseminated disease throughout the rest of the body. You have to be able to look at those tissues and see what changed and what allowed it to go into all these different organs and what allowed it to become metastatic, and setting up the systems for moving our investigations into the metastatic tissues is actually a big part of what BCRF is funding now and has been funding, in my own lab-based research.
Similar to Dr. Dorraya, what's been the greatest challenge for you over the 18 months, given the climate?
Well, I think the pandemic, it's hard to, it's sort of the 800-pound gorilla of challenges. We had to pivot pretty quickly to delivering care in a pandemic. I mean, we did as much, we shifted to virtual care, telemedicine very quickly. But cancer patients need to be seen. They need to come in for care. They need to come in for treatment. So, there was a lot of challenges in figuring out how to do that safely, which we did. I have to say we had a remarkable experience with administrative and organizational, quick shifts to being able to manage patients actually coming in and seeing us safely. And with, I think last Jess, we haven't had a single transmission within our healthcare system of the virus within that. I think you're safer in our hospital than you are in your grocery store. And then for clinical trials, like I'm a trialist. And so, we had to shut down clinical trials, almost entirely for several months and then figure out how to, again, safely integrate research into clinical care in the setting of the augmented needs of a pandemic, which is, I think we're in a pretty good place now comparatively, but we're a long way from where we were before the pandemic.
Thank you. I want to go back to Dorraya and talk more about the mission of the BCRF. I know that you're very challenged, and certainly the pandemic didn't help that with funding being reduced. But how are you poised? How is the BCRF poised to address this with all of these challenges?
Well, so the BCRF, as we've talked about, is the largest nonprofit funder of breast cancer research. And we do that by raising funds through getting our mission and the impact of the research that we fund out. We have a tremendous communications team that gets out blogs and podcasts and all sorts of content about the impact of research and why research is the reason and will get us to the end of breast cancer. And so for this past 18 months, we've increased those efforts, and we have, by and large, come through this with our research portfolio and funding intact, and are poised to move forward. And as you heard from Lisa, and we'll hear more about, BCRF researchers adapted. And there were many actual significant breakthroughs over these 18 months. Large studies like the RxPonder study that showed that women with postmenopausal women with hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative breast cancer and 1 to 3 nodes could safely forgo chemotherapy, while premenopausal women needed actually chemotherapy. And so large trials with some significant breakthroughs still came through in this pandemic. And I think as we are making a turn and things in labs and clinics and the fundraising world are starting to return to normal, we're all poised to really take back off to the challenges that we'll see down the road from the pandemic.
That is excellent, because I had to go through the chemotherapy, the radiation. Imagine me, look at my hair now. Imagine me with no hair, no eyebrows, no eyelashes. That's what chemotherapy does. And the research that you're doing at BCRF is really having an impact on women like myself. If they could forgo that, that would be wonderful. What an amazing thing research is. So Lisa, you have mentioned already how you've had to pivot during the pandemic, but are there other things that you'll do differently in this next chapter as a researcher and a clinician?
I think, well, as a clinician, what we don't want to give back are things that were the silver lining to the dark cloud, right? I mean, telemedicine was a wonderful advance for our patients, right? Sometimes we need to physically see them and examine them. Sometimes we just need to talk to them, and making them come into the hospital complex in order to talk to them is if we can avoid that, that's a wonderful advantage. And I think, that's now become normal as an integrated function in our care. And I don't think that's going to change. And I think that's a positive. I think from a research standpoint, there's also been those kinds of elements. I think we all had to learn to be a little more nimble in how we do things. And I think some of those lessons learned and some of the technological advances that let us do these things seamlessly electronically I don't think we're not going to give those back. And so I think those are some of the things that we need to keep pushing on to keep, in mind that, once the scales fall from your eyes, that you can do a really good job without disadvantaging or inconveniencing the patient. We should double down on that.
That's excellent as well. And I wondered if I could just comment on what your thoughts are for that patient partnership with your medical oncologist, if you want to speak to that.
Oh, this is crucial. I mean, I think in the clinical realm, it is absolutely a partnership, because we come up with a plan of care together, and part of our job is making sure that we've laid out the options, the risks and benefits of a particular approach, and then the patient needs to sort of say what their own values are and what they are willing to do or not do. In the metastatic setting, we're focusing today a little bit on metastases, which it's a little bit different, right? Because we have more flexibility. The goals of care are a little bit different because we're going to be working together in that care. It's a lifelong journey together, with various treatments, and with the goals of therapy being controlling the cancer and the patient's quality of life. And those are basically equal in that setting. So it's an incredibly important partnership. And then when you get to research, research, this is for us to get better. Dorraya is right. Every advance we've ever made came from research, testing a hypothesis about how we might do something better, and then finding that better thing, going to that, which became the new normal. So everything we've done, breast cancer has been it's been a game of singles, but a whole bunch of singles still gets you around all the bases, right? So I think that's a patient's willingness to participate in research and be part of that, both tissue-based research and also clinical trials.
I'm going to pivot back to Dorraya and ask you, because I see you nodding your head, just your thoughts on that research, and how can we get more patients to enroll in these research projects? And we'll talk more a little bit further in the program, but you were nodding your head, and I wondered if you wanted to comment here.
Well, I think that there's a couple things. I think Lisa could really talk about how to increase patient participation in clinical trials. But we get to clinical trials because of the research that's done before that. And we need researchers to also include more patient-relevant samples, patient-relevant cell lines, patient-relevant, things to their research. And we do that by also getting patients involved in research before there's a clinical trial.
That's great. That's great. And I'll just ask, because maybe there's someone out there in the audience that has the question. If I am a patient, can I ask my caregivers if they're participating in any clinical trials, or if they're doing any research, not clinical trials, but research-based? Is that something that could benefit the BCRF?
Well, I'll let Lisa answer the question about talking to your provider.
Yeah, well, I think, the short answer is, oh my God, yes. I love it when patients are interested in what we're trying to do, how we're trying to tack, at the challenges that they're experiencing. No, I think that I think patients should ask, on a personal level, they should ask if there's a trial that's relevant for the situation they're in, and they should consider participating in solving that, whatever problems are going on in that particular arena, whether it's early breast cancer or metastatic disease. And then if they want to find out more, as Dorraya said, a lot of the most important, the keystones of our research start in the lab. They start in other places, and then they come into the clinic. And learning about that, I love it when patients want to hear more about that.
That's excellent. And you mentioned the lab. As I prepared for this conversation, I noticed that one of the BCRF hallmarks in their initiative is the Evelyn H. Lauder Founders Fund. And I proudly wear my Evelyn breast cancer ribbon. It is for metastatic breast cancer research, which Cytiva is very proud to support the BCRF in. Dorraya, can you tell us more about the Founders Fund? What is it? And the Aurora programs?
Yes, so the Founders Fund was launched in honor of BCRF's late founder, Evelyn Lauder, and its hallmark projects, the Aurora EU and Aurora US programs, represent the largest global effort to study metastatic breast cancer. And they do this in exactly the way Lisa and her own research was already going forward, which is by doing deep molecular analyses on both the primary tumor and the metastases. That's where the breast cancer has left the breast and moved to other organs. And to specifically look in the metastases for what has changed, to discover new targets for therapy or new pathways for how metastasis occurs. And what you'll hear from Lisa then is what the Aurora US and Aurora EU teams are finding. And they've made some pretty significant discoveries in the last 5 years.
That's excellent. And I have to ask, because I belong to a group locally, and they always ask me about clinical trials. And there seems to be a little confusion about placebos. Do I get the placebo? Don't I get the placebo? Could you please take us through what a clinical trial is, just to ground the audience?
Oh, sure. I mean, clinical trials are basically trials in which you're testing some idea. You know, it might be a drug, it might be a device, it might be a biomarker, and trying to answer a specific clinical question. You know, these trials might be, you know, a known drug against another known drug, just to see which one's better. I mean, you know, again, if we don't know if one is better than the other, we have to do a trial to figure that out. Sometimes it's taking a known drug and adding a new drug, like a novel drug, and comparing it to not having that second drug. And I think that's when sometimes we have placebos. We only have placebos when there isn't a known treatment of that kind, right? There's only a placebo if, in fact, the normal would not be to either add or have that drug. But that, you know, let me use as a for example, I mean, that kind of a trial is a very safe trial for the patient, because if the standard of care is to give one drug, and the trial is asking whether adding a second novel targeted therapy might help, it's perfectly okay to be, you know, if you get the placebo, you're getting what you would have gotten not on the trial. If you get the drug, you're getting, you know, potentially something that might help you. The problem is it might hurt you, right? I mean, if we knew something was better, then there wouldn't be a trial. So but trials come in all sorts of flavors. They have to. I, as an investigator, and I, as a clinician, when we open a trial here, before we ever open the trial, we look at the trial and we say, do we agree with the question being asked? Do we agree with the approach being used? Is it safe for our patients? Is it appropriate for our patients? Do we think it's going to advance knowledge in the way that may help patients in the future? And if the answer isn't yes to all of those, then we don't open the trial.
Thank you for clearing that up. I really appreciate that. And specifically, could you share a little bit about your participation in the Aurora US program?
Oh, I'd love to. You know, so Aurora US, you know, started with a bunch of, you know, investigators at various institutions who were individually doing work trying to connect the biology of the original cancer to the biology of the metastasis and figure out what went wrong and why did some cancers metastasize and others that looked the same in the beginning didn't, and what is different about the metastasis. But, you know, we at UNC were doing RNA profiling because that's sort of our area of, you know, international expertise. And, you know, in other places they were doing DNA profiling, and somebody else was doing, you know, things that modify how the DNA is turned on or off. But everybody was working separately. And Aurora is an effort to, first we did a pilot where we just started working together and saying, let's all share the tumors and the patient's experiences and do that deep dive that Dorraya was talking about. And everybody does what they do best, right? If you're really good at DNA profiling, you do that. If you're really good at RNA profiling, you do that. But we're going to work together. We're going to do it together and try and get a much more, you know, relevant deep dive that gives us molecular information that no one institution can do.
That's excellent. So now I'd like to shift the conversation, or shift gears, and spend time talking about risk reduction strategies. For every woman participating and thrivers out there, what advice would you give to folks who may be nervous about getting their regular screenings? Dorraya?
So I think by and large, and Lisa can certainly expand upon this from her experience in the clinics, but by and large, it is completely safe to go to your hospital or center for your mammograms and screening. And we know that breast cancer caught early has much better outcomes. The 5-year survival rates for early stage breast cancer are 99%. So if it's time for your mammogram, go get your mammogram.
That's excellent. And Lisa's already mentioned about her advice and the precautions that they've taken during the pandemic and how they had to pivot. So maybe, Dorraya, you can tell us, and for anyone who's been diagnosed or seen a loved one go through this breast cancer treatment or metastasis or still going through it, what are the key strategies you'd recommend for staying healthy and reducing the risk of diagnosis or reoccurrence?
Well, there's no exact formula for prevention, and nothing can completely prevent one from getting breast cancer. But really, the overall key is wellness. So your overall wellness and health. So maintain a healthy diet and try to be, increasing your plants and vegetables and grains and legumes, and try to be low in processed foods. And try to just get your body moving every day, a little bit of exercise. And part of your overall health and wellness would be, to manage your sleep and try to manage chronic stress. But really, these are all things about your overall health and overall wellness. And as Lisa will say, they're really good for a lot of other diseases too.
That's great. And as a follow-up question for our viewers on the broadcast who are passionate about breast cancer research, what are some of the ways that we can support the BCRF's mission?
So you can visit bcrf.org to learn more about how to get involved, like donating online or attending an event or starting your own fundraiser and sharing facts on social media.
That's excellent. So at this point, I want to thank you both. It's an extreme honor to have you here, knowing that research, when it's funded, will save lives. I am a benefactor of one of the BCRF researchers who actually treated me, and here I am 17 years later. We'd like to now invite our audience members to submit their questions to Dr. El-Ashry and Dr. Carey. Now, please use the chat function to submit your question, and please remember that your name may appear on the screen with the question you submitted, and we kindly ask you to refrain from any personal medical questions as our panelists are not able to comment on these issues. Okay, so we have a question that came in. Oh, just a comment. Here's a question. There have been headlines in the news recently that the number of people living with metastatic breast cancer might double in the next 10 years. Can you tell us what this all means?
Yeah, I think, I'll take a first crack at that, and if Dorraya wants to add, I mean, this is a sign of success, right? The reason that women are, the number of people living with metastatic breast cancer is increasing is because we're better able to treat metastatic breast cancer. And one of the incredible things that's happened even during my career is watching metastatic breast cancer from being something where people uniformly died relatively quickly from to being something where people can live for many, many years. I mean, I have patients who are, in decades worth of metastatic breast cancer, which isn't enough because, as you mentioned, Carmen, it's not about just living. You have to be thriving, right? So again, if we talk about the goals are, disease control and quality of life, so many of the drugs that we now use are designed really with that in mind. They're chronic treatments that allow people to live their lives fully, and well. So if we can have people live longer and well, that's fantastic. Now, the downside, and of course, we have to recognize that if you have all these people, you have to have systems in place to take care of them. We have to be able to offer access to oncologic care, to offer access to the drugs, to offer the resources to support people, because metastatic breast cancer patients can have needs that don't mimic early breast cancer patients who don't have any disease. So we have to be very mindful that we have to ramp up our infrastructure to manage this, but it's a nice problem to have.
Yeah, and I would just add that I echo Lisa in that it is a sign of success that women are living longer with metastatic breast cancer, and a success in coming up with treatments that can help do that. But it's also a challenge, and women die from metastatic breast cancer, and in this year there'll be 44,000 people dying from breast cancer. And so this is one of the reasons why BCRF's investment in metastatic breast cancer is 40% of our overall annual investment, because this is our challenge, is to find cures for metastatic breast cancer. And we've had these gains, 9 new drugs approved by the FDA in the past 5 years. And clearly women living longer with breast cancer, and we need to keep that moving. Metastatic breast cancer, we need to keep that moving forward.
That's amazing. I appreciate hearing that. But when we talk about access to care, I cannot help but feel it's paramount to mention that Black women have a 40% higher mortality rate from breast cancer than that of white women. Why is there such a disparity here? And what work are researchers doing to combat it?
There's, this disparity, which is not just a breast cancer disparity. This is true in quite a few tumor types. But in breast cancer, the underlying reasons, and again, there's a lot of research trying to tease this out further, but the things we know are a couple of things. One is the nature of the cancer that Black women get. They are more likely to get triple negative breast cancer than a white woman. So triple negative breast cancer is the one subtype of breast cancer for which we do not have targeted therapies yet. And so by just having a higher proportion with that disease and a lower proportion with the easiest to treat luminal A kind of breast cancer, that already is going to have implications for survival. The second is probably social. What we know when we've done studies of women where you say, okay, if there's a difference in outcome and survival because there's more triple negative and there's less of the luminal A's, let's just say within triple negative, within luminal A, within HER2 enriched and all these different subtypes, do you see a difference by race in outcome? And the short answer is yes. The longer answer is we don't see it so much in triple negative. It seems to have, a bad cancer is a bad cancer. It's more in the luminal hormone receptor positive HER2 negative breast cancers that the disparity seems to be the greatest. And if you think about it, that's the group of patients for whom 5 to 10 years of anti-estrogen therapy is key to cure rates and to survival. And that means access to care, access to drugs, not just today, tomorrow, and for the next few months. It's for years. And so you have to wonder if part of this has to do with, the disparities is really within the group that we think we're doing the best with, but we're not doing the best with everybody.
Thank you for clearing that up. I believe it's important to understand these subtypes and understand the biology and the technical aspects of breast cancer, because they're not all equal. If you have one breast cancer, you have one breast cancer, right? So we've had another question come in, and it says, can you help clarify we've done the clinical trial already. It says breast cancer recently became the most commonly diagnosed worldwide. What's behind this seemingly significant increase? Is there anything we can comment on there?
Yeah, I think Lisa can add on to this, but that they're really due to a complex set of factors, but including, there's the growth of an aging population. A lot of it, adaptation of Western diets and lifestyles, for example, rise in obesity or hormonal risk factors like reduced or delayed childbirth. and as well as improved detection through screening. So many of these are being, found that wouldn't necessarily have been known about. And then finally, there are genetic factors that can increase breast cancer risk in certain populations. And examples of this are BRCA1 mutations in groups such as Ashkenazi Jewish population, as well as other racial or ethnic populations. And so there's a whole set of these factors, and Lisa can add or comment on these.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've hit on the main things. I think, we don't really know all of the reasons. I think it's also true that more people are living into their adulthood and into their, breast cancer risk goes up with age. And as Dorraya said, most women are over 50 when they're diagnosed with breast cancer. Not everybody, but 2/3 are over 50. If you're dying of infections before that, then you're not going to have a chance to get breast cancer. So we also have to think about competing risks for mortality. But I think, a lot of it has to do with, the risk factors that we know are true, which doesn't, which is not an individual, but it's a population-based risk factor. And we're getting back to why do we think it's important to, in general, for cardiovascular health, for, cancer prevention, just to be healthy and reduce obesity and things like that. I mean, I think on a population basis, that's where that kind of recommendation lives, and that's why.
Thank you for that. So we do have another question. I think we did answer, no, we didn't. Here it is. What is the difference between early breast cancer and metastatic breast cancer? And there's a second part, which is, why is early stage breast cancer more treatable? And why do metastatic breast cancer patients need to stay on medication? Boy, that's a great one.
Wow. Yeah. And I have to say, I feel badly because that means I didn't explain things very well earlier. So sorry about that. So, we stage breast cancer as, early or metastatic are the two main groups. And early breast cancer means the breast cancer is only in, visible by x-rays or by, your fingers or whatever. It's only, as far as we can tell, in the breast and the lymph nodes in the area of the breast, the draining lymph nodes that are sort of associated with the breast, which are, under the armpit, and some are up here and sort of down your rib cage and whatnot. That's early breast cancer. And the reason that is distinguished from metastatic is because early breast cancer is curable. And I mean the word cure by saying, there might be cancer cells sleeping, but if the person dies at 100, getting hit by a truck on her way to the opera, I'm okay with that. I don't care if they're sleeping cells. As long as they never come back and they never trouble her again and we never know about them, that's okay. That's what we consider to be cure. But that means the surgeon, sometimes the radiation doc, the medical doc, working together over a time frame, and then we stop. And we hopefully and fortunately, blessedly, in most breast cancer patients now who come in with stage 1, 2, or 3, which are the early stages, most are cured now, using that definition. Metastatic breast cancer is either breast cancer that has already spread into lungs, liver, bones, someplace like that at the time of diagnosis, where you do a scan and you can see it, or a stage 1 or 2 or 3 cancer patient 2 years later, 3 years later, 5 years, 10 years, relapses. And that becomes recurrent metastatic breast cancer. Regardless of whether it's metastatic from the very beginning, which is a minority, it's only 5 or 10% of them, or later as a recurrence, we don't know how to cure that. Our tools right now do not include cure. What it does include is efforts to make it a chronic disease using medical therapy, primarily. And that's why they have to stay on medication, is because it is a disease that's still going to be there. And, the analogy I use in the clinic is, a patient who has diabetes, if their blood sugar is controlled by their anti-diabetes medicine or their insulin or whatever, they come, they get their finger stick, they feel fine, their blood sugar is fine. They still have diabetes. It's just being controlled, it's being managed, it's not bothering them. And that's what we try to get metastatic breast cancer patients to. Someday through research, we hope to get to cure, but I think that's not, right now, that's not what I describe as the goals of therapy. I hope that helps.
That really clears it up, because oftentimes people ask me, like, am I in remission? And my cancer was detected early. So I always say I'm cured. You know, I was stage 0 to 1, barely to a 1. And because of my age, I went through this process, and that was the best thing for me. And here I am today. Now, I'd like to ask our moderators, here we go. Here's the question. How can the biotech industry work to improve outcomes for every woman diagnosed with breast cancer? And that is considering that Cytiva, many of our customers that we support work in the, of course, academic institutions, but the biotech industries. So we're trying to make that connection for them. How can we do this, and how can we help them improve these outcomes?
Well, I will start because I think, looking at this from a clinician and a clinical trialist perspective, I think the biotech industry, who should be our partners and are our partners, we should all be very mindful of what are we trying to accomplish for patients, and supporting research and individuals at largely academic institutions, but not exclusively, to do the research that will help us answer questions, biologic questions, not just FDA questions for the purposes of your drug, but also helping us understand who and why, and being really, really good partners with the investigators and with the patients.
Yes, I would echo that entirely from the research perspective, as well as the clinical perspective. So, I think we make big breakthroughs when you have the great idea, you have money to do it, and you have the technology that allows you to answer the questions of that great idea. And so I think that's where the biotech industry comes in, is in the technologies and the assays and the ways to help answer questions. And so working in partnership with research and clinical research to help move that forward.
That's excellent. Well, thank you both. There are no more questions. So we really appreciate not only having the Chief Scientific Officer for the Breast Cancer Research Foundation to talk with us about the 250 researchers out there working on not just breast cancer, but metastatic breast cancer, and understanding what that is. It's been a privilege to also have a clinical researcher and a medical oncologist on board. Thank you for your time and continued efforts in the fight against breast cancer. And thank you to everyone who tuned in to our conversation today. To learn more about the BCRF and the research it supports, please go to www.bcrf.org. Thank you, and be safe.